As David said, I've been in photography for a real long time. I figured out I was originally published 41 years ago in Popular Photography while I was still in high school. All of the pictures you'll be seeing today I took, many of them for assignments, some of them while reviewing cameras here at B&H. I shot commercially for over 25 years, a lot of it having to do with yachting, and editorial and advertising and portraits, but boats were good because unlike people, they don't talk back. But then you have to deal with sunlight and wind and environments and all kinds of other things. I then spent 11 years at a place called Photo Care, which was on 21st, now it's on 22nd, dealing with high-end photo equipment, saw the growth and the emergence of digital imaging. Personally speaking, and this is not editorial, I haven't shot film since August 2000, appropriately enough, while photographing some antique wood speedboats. And I've been shooting digital ever since, and I really, really happen to like digital. I like film. I still like opening up the old Kodak boxes and holding up negatives I shot decades ago, and they're still there. Don't ask me to open up JPEGs that I shot 10 years ago. I probably can't even find them. How many people here are only digital? How many people still shoot film? How many people don't know what film is? Okay, all right. How many people here shoot for a living, or at least make some money doing it? Anybody? Okay, all right. And how many people are just doing it for the fun of it? How many people are just like waiting for the bus back to Scarsdale and just, okay, killing time? There we go, all right. Anyway, so we're going to be talking about lenses today and what they do, and how many people here only have the kit lens that came with their camera? The 18 to 55, I'm assuming, or 28 to 105. All right. That's a great lens. You could do a lot of things with it. And when going through this presentation, I'm amazed how many pictures I actually took with what would be a kit lens, or the lens that was built into the camera in the case of point and shoots. And I like point and shoot cameras a lot, by the way. I've handled $60,000 cameras, and I've handled $200 cameras. And my feeling is that the camera is really not all that important when it comes to taking pictures. And I've had and owned and had access to many amazing pieces of equipment over the years, and still do, and I find that the best camera is still the one that you happen to have in your pocket when you need it, because I don't know about most of you, but I really don't feel like carrying a lot of weight around, so I've been growing down and down and down. And the good news is that there's a lot of great cameras that are very small that enable you to do a lot of things. As David mentioned, I was very big into yachting photography for many years. I had no business doing so. I started shooting for a magazine called Nautical Quarterly, which was out for about 11 or 12 years, and the publisher and editor and art director was a fellow named Marty Pedersen, who's now the publisher of Graphies Publications, and he's an amazing graphic designer who I went to right out of school to show him my pictures of Coney Island, because I just liked his work, and I started working for him. They paid me $75 a day, which to me was just wonderful, and I traveled all over the place photographing boats. And what's interesting about shooting boats is that everything has a challenge to it, whether you're doing a portrait or anything you're taking pictures of. And boats are challenging because they're all basically long tubes. Some of them have sails, and they're almost always all white, and you're photographing them in harsh sunlight with blue skies and blue water, and you're kind of limited. And quite often you have to put them onto a vertical page, and they're horizontal objects. So there's a lot of challenges that come into it. And then you have to deal with weather and atmosphere. And whether you like it or not, sometimes it rains, and you have to make the best of that. So it was a huge learning experience, and I was able to apply it in many, many ways. And sometimes I lucked out with atmosphere, sometimes I had to build what was there. The photograph on the upper left-hand side is a perfect example of having to go a little bit beyond the obvious. And when I traveled to photograph boats, one of the things I always carried with me was a duffel bag of bright sweaters and T-shirts, because those people were wearing white T-shirts. Now take the red out of their shirts and sweaters, and that picture does not have the same dynamics. So I carried a duffel bag of dynamic colors with me, and that bailed me out many, many, many times. Got to shoot from different angles, because obviously you're shooting this, it's like shooting shoes. Shoes are shoes are shoes. So you have to find different ways of doing it. I found one of my best tripods was a Bell Jet Ranger, which enabled me to hover right over it and keep up with 90-mile-an-hour speedboats and look straight down. The photograph from that Signature magazine, I think, was one of my favorite for solving a problem where they wanted to do a cover shot of these Hinckley yachts, which are amazing boats made up in Maine. And again, the challenge of a vertical image of a horizontal object, and lo and behold, I got there and there was a big, rare red hull up on dry dock, and there I was able to capture a good dramatic image with a 24-millimeter lens. We're going to be talking a lot about focal lengths here, and there's many different kinds of lenses, and I use lenses like an artist would use a brush, and that's really what a lens is. It's a brush, and some lenses take in wider angles, some take in tighter, and it does not necessarily mean you use the wider one for a landscape, or it doesn't even mean you need a macro lens to do a close-up. There's different little things that you do, and we're going to be seeing some examples of that along the way here. How we see. Let's start off with that. Rule of thumb is 50 millimeter is normal. Now we're talking about 35 millimeter here. I'm going to be bouncing around in formats. How many people shoot full format 35? 24 by 36 millimeter, which is what film would be. Okay. Can I assume the rest of you are shooting with APS-C format cameras, which is a fancy way of saying compact DSLR, and you have to multiply the focal length by 1.5 or 1.6. Okay, that's APS-C or compact. Here we're talking about 50 millimeter. That's for 35 millimeter cameras. And the truth of the matter is 50 is not the norm. It's actually 43.2. And the way we're defining normal is a lens that will define the proper perspective and spatial relationships between basically the way we see and the way the camera is seeing, so that when you take a picture, things do not look like they're spread apart or compressed. They're represented and reproduced on a two-dimensional plane the way our eye perceives it as far as spatial relationships. So 43.2 is actually the most accurate for normal in a 35 millimeter. If you're shooting with a compact DSLR, that would be a 17 millimeter lens, because that's about 50% smaller. The Olympus, or 4/3, is an 18.5 millimeter, is your normal, or half of a 48, whatever that was, okay?
That
Normal is relative.
where I
Yes.
see it.
So depending on what format camera you're shooting with, normal becomes a smaller and smaller focal length. All right, so here I'm saying if you're shooting with a point-and-shoot camera, a normal lens is 6 to 7 millimeter. All right. Now what happens if you put a 6 or 7 millimeter lens onto a 35 millimeter full-frame camera? Anybody have any idea? You get a fisheye. All right. Everything becomes circular. Now, because it's such a short focal length lens, an 8 millimeter lens on a full frame camera just gives you a circle that shows up to 180 degrees. And if you were to pull the center piece out of that fisheye image, and by the way, I don't have a pointer here, but if that is a full frame image, that's about the size of a point and shoot sensor compared to a 35 millimeter full frame. And if you were to look at the image area within that little circle, what you get is that, which is basically what we call normal. And that's what 6 or 7 millimeter out of a full frame 35 would pull out. So as you go down in formats, normal goes down in size. You have 50 millimeter, goes down to 35, down to 18, down to 6, depending on what size sensor is inside your camera. Don't get too hung up on it. If you don't understand, we'll talk later. So, however, normal is an interesting thing because our eyes don't just see this box that's, basically normal. We see broad, we see wide field. And the focal length on a full frame camera that would replicate about what we see with our eyes without getting too distorted is about 22 to 23 millimeter. Now, personally speaking, one of my favorite lenses is a 24 because it always spoke to me when I look through a 24 millimeter lens on a wide angle, or a 16 or 17 millimeter on an APS-C camera. It feels familiar and it looks normal to me. I see that way. That's one of my favorite focal lengths. Now, that gets a little bit more complicated because we have two eyes, and they overlap because we have two eyes set about 70 millimeters apart, and they take in two fields of view, and our eye basically stitches all this together. So we actually see about 140-degree angle of view, very wide field. So when I'm sitting right over here, my vision basically cuts out from around here to here. It's about 140 degrees, not 180, but about 140, 138, depending on your particular structure, health. There's a lot of variety, a lot of variables that go into that. So we see wide field, even though we see quote-unquote normal. Unlike camera lenses, we can only focus on 1/2 of 1 degree at any given time. That's a very thin sliver. Everything else is out of focus. And that's the difference between our eyes and a photograph. A photograph, you could stop down your lens to a small aperture and get everything in focus. We don't see that way. We only see 1/2 of 1 degree at any point in time sharp. And as our eyes move around, we have about 10, we could record about 10 movements per second. Our eye catches images and patches all of this together and makes a constantly changing quilt, so everything seems in focus, but we're only really focusing on the exact spot that we're looking at. We also only see color in the central 20%. Everything else is monotone. You don't see, once you go out over here, okay, it's black and white. And the only reason we think we see color all over is because, again, our eyes are moving around constantly. And we keep remembering all this stuff. We have an amazing computer up in our heads. We just don't use them very well. The choice of lens makes a big difference in the visual dynamics of your photographs. Now, what do we mean by that? Your choice of lens and how you use it will determine what the photograph looks like. And you could photograph the same object or the same subject with different lenses and get very different effects. Here is a little stone house. It is a little village near where I live. They gathered all the old farmhouses and put them all together in one spot before they bulldozed the land for new development. And the same place is photographed with a 14mm, and this is on a full-frame 35mm camera, Nikon D3 to be exact. It had a large full-format sensor. 14mm is extreme wide angle. And I composed this picture using the white fence leading up to the house. I then moved back about 50, 60 feet and photographed the same building with a 105mm macro lens used as a 105 short telephoto. Same place, totally different configuration, different dynamic, has a total different look and feel. And one of the neat things we have with a lot of cameras today is the zoom lenses. How many people use fixed focal length lenses? Anybody here? Okay, the rest of you using zooms? We're using both, okay. Zooms are kind of, I like zooms. I use them a lot. And when I was photographing boats, especially when you're on a dock or you're on a helicopter, you can't step back or get forward. Zooming was the only option that I would have. And I would use it very, very specifically to frame things the way I wanted to use them. We get lazy with it, though, because we stand here, want to take a picture, and look at it and zoom in or zoom out. But there's something to be said about stepping back or getting closer and looking at the same thing with it from a different focal length, zooming in and zooming out while you too are moving back and forth. And we'll talk about that a little bit also. Same day I shot this. This is a snow fence shot with the same 14mm and 105mm lens. And again, very, very different dynamic about it. Wide-angle lenses also allow you to get more in focus at a given time. The longer your focal length, the shallower your focus becomes, regardless of your f-stop. And that's very visible here as well. The 105mm, you can see it goes way out of focus pretty quickly, whereas with the 14mm, even though the distance is out of focus, it seems clearer. It's just not the same. A vase of flowers shot with a 25mm lens and then a 400mm lens at closest focusing. It was a Nikon, I think it's the 200 to 400mm zoom they just came out with. Focuses down to about 4.5 feet, which is extraordinary for shooting close-ups and knocking everything in front of it and out of it, before it and after it out of focus. Same vase, two different moods, two different looks to them. Anybody ever hear the term bokeh? We're going to take a little sidebar here. Okay. The wide angle shot, the 25mm, is a good example of what bokeh does. That's with a Zeiss 25mm 2.8 wide aperture. Bokeh is an interesting term. It's actually a Japanese transliteration for a term that means the quality of what is not in focus. And the whole thing is that it's easy to make a sharp lens, but not all lenses go out of focus with pleasing visual look to them. And better lenses, usually ones with rounder apertures or curved aperture blades, tend to render out of focus highlights as more pleasing to the eye. And this is a good example of pleasing bokeh. B-O-K-E-H. And there's a lot said about it. And the best example I ever saw of bokeh in the real world is next time you're walking through the streets at high noon, preferably, and you see the sun coming through trees and leaves, look at the shadows between highlight and shadow, and it's gorgeous bokeh because the sun, it just is, there's no aperture there. And look at the softness and roundness of what's in and out of focus, and that's good bokeh. So optics try to mimic that. Some do better. German glass, as a rule, is very good at it. Now the Japanese glass is getting better because they're using curved aperture blades. The whole secret is to have a round f-stop. And if you have flat blades, 7 or 8 flat blades, it's really an octagon or a hexagon. How many people have ever seen photographs and highlights in the background look like octagons and hexagons floating around? You see these geometric shapes. That's because there were not enough blades in the diaphragm. That's called bad bokeh. Good would be round, soft, natural looking. We see round, we see soft. Our eyes and our pupils are round. So that's what it's all based on. Wide angle lenses. I tend to prefer them. I love using them. They're also smaller and lighter to carry around. This is one of my most favorite wide angle shots. This was taken with a 15mm ultra wide on a Nikon F3 shot with film. This was for Philadelphia Magazine, and it was the first loop-to-loop roller coaster in New Jersey, and they wanted a picture to run across 2 pages that shows what it's like to be on this thing when you're upside down. Now, I hate roller coasters, and so I brought my remote control with me, and I figured I'd use that, of course. The batteries were dead, so I had to sit next to the camera. The camera, don't try this at home, folks. The camera was gaffer taped on a tripod to the first car. It was secured. 3 people looked at it because if something went loose, it would have been ugly. I was pre-digital, so I had to pre-visualize what it was going to look like and hope I was correct in my assumptions. And I went on 8 complete rides on this thing before I got the shot. So by the time we were done, my lips were in my socks. And I immediately followed this up with another assignment in Cape May, photographing a lovely French restaurant, and I couldn't eat a darn thing. Anyway, this was kind of fun, and they weren't sure whether to run the picture right side up or upside down, so it really didn't matter. But the extreme wide angle was necessary in order to capture such a broad space. Now here's a bit of anecdotal information for you. This was shot in April for a June issue, because usually you shoot a month or 2 before. Now, in April, you don't find too many people down by the Jersey Shore. So what do you do if you have to fill up a roller coaster with people off-season? And mind you, this is pre-internet, pre-cell phones, all right? What you do is you look up in the phone book the American Coaster Enthusiast Association, which are a bunch of idiots that if you just say there's a new roller coaster we need to try out, and you put out coffee and sandwiches, they show up. And these people came from the tri-state area and were just happy to sit and ride a roller coaster all day. So these are true fanatics. Wide-angle lenses should be used judiciously, okay? If you stick one in somebody's face, they look like this. Now, I was driving along, saw this car, and I just had to stop and take a picture because it was smiling to me. And it was taken with a 20mm ultra-wide on a full-frame camera, and it just has this nice big grin about it. And it works here because it's fun. It's whimsical. However, if you want to photograph a car or a boat, and by the way, I learned about this when photographing boats because I came back the first few times with some really cool pictures of boats, and they couldn't use them because they were totally distorted. And I had to learn early on that, yes, use wide-angle lenses, but make sure the shear line isn't distorted. Make sure that everything is in perspective, because the people who are looking at these pictures know what boats look like, and they want to be able to actually understand the shape, the size, and the features, and the dynamics of the boat's design. So there are times when you can interpret, and there are times when you don't interpret.
You said ultra wide angle. I mean, does it fix lens?
Yes. Now, it doesn't mean you can't have ultra wide on a zoom. I mean, Nikon makes a 12 to 24. That's an ultra wide zoom. Ultra wide means wider than what I would call 28mm, or wider than the widest position on your 18 to 55 zoom on your kit camera. All right. 28mm is wide angle. 24 is very wide. 20, 21, 16, 18, 14, that's ultra wide. That's when you get into, that's when you have to be careful. 28mm, you can still be a little bit sloppy. It's wide angle, but it doesn't yell at you. But you start getting close to things with anything wider than that, you have to make sure you're not distorting it. If you look up, everything's going to cave in. All right, so you have to start thinking. And by the way, looking through the finder, you don't always see the distortions. Quite often, you don't really recognize them until you see them in the finished photograph, which is a nice thing about playing it back. And another thing I love about digital is that you see everything right up front. And it gives you a chance to look and go, let's try this. Whereas film, you go through all the pictures a day or two later, a week later, whatever, and it's gone. It's over. Digital enables you to work through and keep going on. And I find that I'm a better photographer because of digital. That's my own personal experience. Because I look at the screen, I think about it, I go in and I do it again. Now here is a photograph of another car taken with a 24mm lens, wide angle. However, it's not really distorting. Now, mind you, if I got a foot closer to this car, that front fender would have been looking real bulgy. And I got as close as I can and backed off a little bit until it did not have that exaggerated front. And then I got up to the top of the hood just to see over it a little bit. I was working on a tripod with a bubble level to make sure everything is nice, straight, and clear. And I shot with a polarizing filter to eliminate glare from the car and darken the skies. I'm very big using polarizing filters outdoors. It's a great, great tool to bring in depth, eliminate flare and glare. Yes, you can. Good question. The question is, can't you do a polarizing filter in Photoshop? Yes, with an asterisk. You can amplify the saturation of color, but you cannot eliminate glare. You cannot see the rocks underneath the water, okay? Because you can't eliminate reflections. You can't kill glass reflections, water reflections, all right? So yes, you can amplify color, but you cannot kill glare. Two filters you need. You need a good UV filter and you need a polarizing filter. The rest of them you could play around with in Photoshop. I hate to kill filter sales here because it's a moneymaker, but that's really the truth. Whenever people say, what filters do I get? UV protects your front lens and does eliminate haze and does cut through the things a little bit, makes it a little bit cleaner color, and a polarizer, which you cannot emulate after the fact. You just can't do it.
Can you put both of them on your camera?
Oh, no, good question. No, never double up your filters. A, there's no reason to, because the polarizer, first of all, plain glass eliminates about 98% of ultraviolet light, UV. UV doesn't pass through glass, all right? So your polarizing filter is already made of glass, so that is that problem. Also, you have to think about, and by the way, the truth of the matter is, keep the filter on, but take it off when you're shooting real critical things, because your lens is a very specific design. It was scientifically and computer-generated design. Even if you put the best filters on, and when I say best, I mean thinnest glass with the best coatings, you're still putting something else in front of your lens. And if you take that away, now if you're shooting in a hazy, bright day, yeah, put on a UV. But otherwise, take it off. Your picture quality will go up a notch. And when you double up filters, you're just adding more layers of stuff to shoot through. So there's nothing to be accomplished, and you're degrading your image. So no, don't stack filters.
On the different kinds of polarizing filters?
There are two main kinds. There's the standard. Now also, well, circular. Now, circular you should be using anyway, because circular is designed for use with autofocus and matrix metering. So if you see circular, that's the one you want. They have linear or plain polarizers, and they're fine, but it might throw off your metering, and it might throw off your autofocus. And the polarizers are interesting. The way they work, it's very fine micro grooves etched into the glass. And with linear, it's just parallel lines. Circular is literally circular. And the circular does not confuse the autofocus system. Linear can, and can also affect your metering. So yes, you can use them, but you got to be careful. So the basic bottom line is buy circular, and you can use them on anything. The other variations you'll have, there are things called warm polarizers, which I've used when shooting boats under midday skies, and I just want to warm it down a little bit. But that you can do in Photoshop. You could warm and cool in Photoshop. All right, so that's not that critical. I would say get a neutral one. What I will recommend, and this is for filters and lenses, get the better ones. You can save money, and you can get a good quality product. There are very good lenses out there that are not expensive. However, the better ones tend to be more expensive, not just in optical quality, but in construction. And we sell all lenses here, and again, I always say you really do get what you pay for, and one thing about lenses is that you don't replace them as often as you replace your camera. You buy a good lens, it will go through your next 3 or 4 cameras. We all know every 2 or 3 years we're replacing cameras. They become disposables. I used to shoot with Nikon F3s. They were workhorses. They made them for 26 years. And I can't tell you how I would abuse them and bash them and just trash them. And they never failed. One, they failed when a wave came over the side of the boat and filled my bag with seawater. Okay? It was $349 to replace the shutter. That's what I paid for the camera. The new one was now $1,200. So, but that's the way it was. You can't do that anymore with cameras. Here's a couple of yes, go ahead.
Are all filters the same quality?
There are filters that cost $10 and $12, and then you'll find the same description from another manufacturer, and it costs $40, $50, $60. I tend to go with the better ones. Thinner glass, better coating. Remember, you're putting something in front of your lens. If you're only making 8x10s or using pictures that'll be on the web, it doesn't matter. But if your goal is to make high quality, sharp prints, especially larger than 11x14, you will never regret buying a better filter. Your pictures will be better. They'll be just sharper, cleaner. No two ways about it. If you want to ask me what I use, I shoot B&W and Heliopan. The best filters made are made by Leica. They're extraordinarily expensive, but they're extremely thin glass. Leica's goal is good coatings and the least amount of glass to get the job done. And then another thing, another variable that you're paying for with filters is the ring. Less expensive filters have aluminum rings. The more expensive ones have brass rings. Am I in good range here? Okay. The brass rings do not jam on your lens. They don't dent when you bang them. The aluminum ones get jam. You bang them against something, they get kinked. They just don't hold up as well. So I prefer, I have filters that I've had for 20, 30 years. I'm still using them. I have step-up rings, a complete set that I paid a fortune for. I still own them. They don't jam, they don't bend, they don't get messed up. So again, certain things you could scrimp on, certain things, a filter you're going to use for a long time, a lens you're going to be using for a long time. Not only that, a lens is what's taking the picture. It doesn't matter what the camera is in many applications because, let's face it, the cameras all do a decent job. Some focus quicker, some have better metering, but the sensors and the technology are all pretty darn good. But if you have a lousy lens, it doesn't matter how good your sensor is. It doesn't matter how many megapixels you have. It doesn't matter how big it is. If the lens isn't good, your pictures aren't going to be that good. And in fact, one of the problems that manufacturers are having right now is that the image quality of today's sensors are so good, especially with the larger format cameras, the Nikon D3s, the Sony, whatever their full frame one is, and the Canon 1DS. Those sensors exceed the resolving power of medium format film, okay? Which means that if you're going to spend $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 for that camera, you have to buy the more expensive lenses because the less expensive lenses, you look at the pictures and say, why did I spend this money? It's like a sound system. You could buy the best amplifier and preamp and everything else. If you're going to scrimp on the speakers, guess what you're listening to? You're listening to the speakers. Lenses are like speakers. You want to have good, fine quality. The amp is not as important as the speaker. Maybe people shoot me for that. But I'm going to say right now that the lens is basically what's capturing that image. If you don't capture it sharp, it won't be sharp no matter how much you tweak, unsharp mask. It just isn't as sharp. And you see a difference. If you shoot with a good lens and you shoot with a mediocre, you could see it. Yeah.
You mentioned some brand names of filters before.
Yeah, B plus W and Heliopan. Both happen to be German made, and it's the best stuff as far as I'm concerned. Back to here, that same car, these are a few details taken with the same wide angle lens. I like getting close with a wide angle because you could feature something strong in the foreground and then show the rest of it in the background. I like using wide angles even for portraits because if it's placed properly, you show the person in their environment, what's commonly called environmental portraiture. And yes, you could use a 105 for a headshot, but if you want to show a person in their world, okay, a 24 millimeter is just a magical lens in my opinion. I actually spent a lot of time with that car belongs to a friend of mine who's a lunatic and just collects cars. And he just had it back from a ground-up restoration. And I shot, to get that picture, I probably shot 12 or 15 variations. And they were not very different because I know what I was looking for. And when I say variations, I mean moving like this or this or this, and then using maybe stepping back and zooming in, or changing a lens. I don't remember if I was using zooms or fixed. I used a series of lenses with that. So the differences between all the pictures are very subtle. And it's cropped a little bit. I have no issues about cropping. I know there are purists that say, you never crop a photograph. Yeah, and you burn and dodge also, okay? You know, and you spot out the dust marks. It's, you know. Yes? That color. It's silver. The sun was going down, so there's a little bit of warmth in it. It's a blue silver. It's like a powder silver, powder blue silver. The sun is going down, so you have that yellow light. Sunrise and sunset is killer time. Okay, it's also the best time to photograph boats, but with sailboats, the wind dies then, so you kind of like skunked on that one. It's always a gamble. So yeah, we planned it very specifically to shoot the last half hour of the day, and I had to work fast. And I used a polarizing filter to eliminate reflections. Otherwise, there was reflections of trees in the sky and everything else. So polarizing filter, time of day, and getting into a, by the way, here's a little trick about cropping, and I think these pictures are perfect examples of that, and I learned this from one of my instructors years ago. The trick of taking a good photograph, or making a good illustration for that matter, is keep getting closer and closer and closer, and at some point, you're not going to recognize what it is. And when you get to that point, move back a little bit, and that's where you are. And I think these pictures are perfect examples of that. I've eliminated all the extraneous stuff here. And I do that, I think, pretty well with most of my photographs. That's my goal. If I can't shoot it initially the way I see it, I crop in and reshape the format and the aspect ratio to match that. I don't care if it's not a perfect square or rectangle. I don't care about that. Each of these pictures has a different shape. And it's because I crop them just to show what I wanted to say. And that, to me, is the essence of a good photograph. And the same thing goes for portraits. These are portraits as far as I'm concerned. Doesn't matter what the subject is. It's a portrait. And that's a secret. And you'll notice if you look at a good portrait, quite often they just get in so tight and it's just right there. And that's the point. And it's a good idea to look at your pictures once in a while when you take them and put them up on the screen. And then start cropping a little bit and playing around and pull selections out. Yes? Yes. So a 24 millimeter on an APS would be a 15, 16 millimeter. Your kit lens is usually a 28 to 105, 28 to 90, so a little bit wider than your kit lens. That's what that would be. Yes?
Well, I have two questions.
Sure.
One, I thought that if you used a wide angle for a portrait, it distorts the face.
It depends how close you get. And here, too, you'll see that. If you get in closer, and by the way, when I say portraits with a wide angle, not face. I'm talking 3/4, half portrait, okay? And I may or may not have them in this presentation. I had some in an early one. I might not have it in this. But I get step back from the person. It's the same thing. You move in and then you step back. Just like the car, if I got any closer, that front fender was going to start coming out at me. So I backed off and it went back in. And I was able to get this, it was coming at you, even though it was sitting still. It looks like there was a movement to it. Same thing with a portrait. You basically shoot this much of the person and you step back and you say, also, don't look this way or that way. You really have to be careful. Keep the camera parallel to your subject. That also eliminates distortions. And then play around with height and keep something in the foreground. And by the way, what I'm talking about right here shows up in a lot of the pictures I'm going to be showing. It's the same. It doesn't matter if there's a person in it or if it's a street sign. It's how you approach it.
But can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
So if you have a zoom lens and
Yeah.
you use it on 22 or whatever,
Okay.
is it the same as the fixed focal length 22?
Yes.
It gets the exact same?
Yes. Yeah. 22 millimeters, 22 millimeters, 22 millimeters. The only thing that will change is the format of the sensor. 22 on a 35 is very wide angle, and it's moderate on an APS-C, and it's telephoto on a point-and-shoot camera.
Well, then why would anybody use a fixed focal length instead of just having?
Good question. Good question. Several reasons. Almost universally, and less so than it used to be, fixed focal length lenses are sharper than zooms because they're simpler designs. Today's zooms are phenomenal. They're actually amazing, especially if you buy the better zooms. They're really, really good. They almost match at every focal length the sharpness of a fixed focal length lens at any point in that range. Fixed focal length lenses are faster. You'll never see a zoom faster than 1.8. You can get a 1.4 fixed focal length, f2, f2.5, f1.2, f.095. And we're going to get to that too. And why would you want to use that? We'll get to that too. Because there are things you could do with an f1.4 lens and f2 lens that you cannot do with an f2.8 lens. Just won't happen. So you have sharpness, you have wider apertures, and almost universally a fixed focal length lens will focus closer than a zoom. If you speak to portrait shooters or people who are working as journalists with 35 millimeter equipment, almost all of them will have a 70 to 200 millimeter 2.8 zoom. That's like standard tool for your camera bag. It's a great lens. You'll also note that they'll have a 105 portrait lens or a 180 2.8. The focal length's covered in the zoom, but those lenses open up wider and focus closer. And you can get a tighter portrait without having to crop into the original frame. Just right then and there, you're shooting it. It's where you want it to be. So, and it used to be more so. When I started shooting, the original zoom lenses were miserable. They were horrible. They were just bad, okay? And the past 10, 12 years or so, the zooms, especially the L series lens, the more expensive ED, IF, okay, they're actually pretty darn good. And I have no issue shooting with zooms, and I just like the fact that I could have one or two lenses and do a number of things. At the same time, I'll tell you that if you give me a 24 millimeter lens and a 105 lens, I could shoot 95% of anything I'll ever have to shoot. Ever. 2 lenses and a backup body. Here's a few other examples of wide angle stuff. Another thing I like about wide angles, these are all taken with very wide. That crew boat, that rowing shell, that is taken with an 18 millimeter on a full frame 35. And when you walk up to it, sitting there, that's what it looks like. Wide angle lenses sort of invite you into the picture, and they show you the subject with everything around it, environmental. The sailing boat too, and again, that was a tricky one because if I looked up at the sails, we got too close, everything was distorted. So I had the guy in the chase boat pull back to a point and I zoomed in where I had. That was with a 24 to 15 millimeter zoom, I believe, and it's just about wide, completely wide. And I was trying not to look up too much because I didn't want to pull the boat and distort it. So there's a balancing act between getting the whole boat in and having that swoop of sail come out, and the red and white just makes the whole picture against the blue skies. And there's a polarizing filter there. Look how that blue just sings. That was not happening without a polarizer. In the lower right-hand side, the lobster boats, spots of color are just huge to have. In other words, just if they were green, I wouldn't have bothered to even take the picture. And here's a good example of using a wide angle where, again, those buoys, those whatever they're called, the markers, they just invite you into the picture and they make the dynamics of it. The top pictures with a Canon G10 out through a window in an airplane. It's just heaven and earth. It's just great stuff. Spots of red. Secret of art. Ready to write this down? Secret of making good art. Okay, here it is. If you can't make it good, make it big. If you can't make it big, paint it red. That's it. That's all you got to know about art. Okay, that's it. These are, all three of these were shot on assignment for either New York Magazine or Philadelphia Magazine. The center one of that schoolhouse was for weekend getaways in Connecticut for New York Magazine. And they would just give me a script and I would ignore it and just drive around back roads and stop every time I saw something that was pretty. And that was shot full frame 35 with an 18 millimeter lens and a polarizing filter. Just sucked all the glare out of it. The green sings, the red sings, the sky sings with it. The only thing that got me a little bit upset was that as I'm getting up, some lady was walking a dog says, "Should have been here last week when each of those little green things had a yellow flower on top." But, you know, you get what you can take.
Where were you low in
I was laying in the grass.
I was going to say, is this grass or cornstalks? I'm just trying
Yeah, now most people will just stand there and do this. Okay, here's another rule of thumb. Don't shoot from eye level. Climb up on something. Get down on your hands and knees. Lay in the dirt. Okay? And I'm going to show you more pictures where your point of view and angle. Everybody looks like this. Okay? No, no, no. Get up, get down, move around, do the thing. Yeah. Yeah, because it was really starting to distort and I was at the curb. I was half in the grass and half in the street taking this picture. Okay? So yeah, that's really what it was. Now, if I had a 15 millimeter lens with me, I would have been able to pull it off, but I only had an 18. So yeah, that's why. And already you can see it's already starting to lean back a little bit. Now that's easily correctable in Photoshop now. But this is, when Photoshop meant the place, a shop where you take photos or something. This is, a long time ago. This is pre-digital. The photograph on the left of that red post with the fence, that was taken with also, I think, a 20 millimeter lens. And the idea of that was I had to take a photograph that was going to be a full page in Philadelphia Magazine. And the gist of the article was, I think it was called The Road Least Taken. It was basically, if you're in Philadelphia and you're going down to the shore for the weekend, you just hate the highways. They're horrible and ugly. So here's some back road suggestions and why you should do it. And I was basically doing it. And I was shooting early in the morning. And first of all, the red caught my eye naturally. And I think it summed it up because it showed a road. It showed that it was not a major highway. And you have a little stream going by. There are two people in a canoe and a little fishing shack there. And it just summed it up. And I used the wide angle lens because with a normal telephoto, it would not have had the same dynamic. I'm big into diagonal lines. And you'll notice here the left and right photographs playing out diagonals and shadows and movement. A wide angle lens allows you to pull in a lot of elements, a lot of shapes. And it's a matter of using all of those and positioning yourself in the camera to a point where they create one big play across the screen. You have a canvas. How are you going to fill it up? And I find a wide angle lens in situations like this is just a great way of playing around with lines and angles and shadows and just getting them to be composed properly. 24 millimeter lens, another thing where I had to just stop. I saw this. And again, I did not shoot from eye level. I climbed up on top of another chair and shot down. I also moved them around a little bit. And very simple. And you know what? A lot of people see this picture and they just stop because it looks so homey and so inviting. And wide angle is what does it. With a 50 millimeter lens, a normal lens, or telephoto, it would not be the same picture. Just would not be the same. Telephoto lenses, I like them too. You can go to extremes. Telephotos come in a variety of ranges. We had a lens here for a while. We've had two of them, in fact. A very rare lens, less than 21 made, was a 1200 millimeter Canon lens that cost about $60,000 new. They made them by hand. There was one old Japanese optician who made them to order. It took 18 months to take delivery. The government bought a few. Sports Illustrated has one, National Geo has one, and I'm sure the feds have some stashed away. It weighed about 40 pounds, took two people to lift it up on a tripod. It was hysterical to look at. I mean, but what was interesting is that we went up, our office building is the next block up on 440 9th Avenue. We went up to the roof with it, and we aimed it up 9th Avenue. And I'm not exaggerating to tell you that we shot with a full-frame DSLR. We put I think it was a Canon 1DS Mark something. And at pixel resolution, we photographed buildings that were a mile away. I figure they're 40, I know where the area, it was about 54th Street and 9th Avenue. I could describe the artwork on people's walls. Wow. Okay? It's frightening. We were reading street signs in Weehawken. Okay? Does that tell you? Okay? All right? Awesome. This was taken with a 500 millimeter lens and a very particular one that I've owned for a while that I loved, and that was a 500 millimeter mirror lens, f5. Anybody familiar with mirror lenses? They're basically telephoto. They're basically telescopes. They're not big. In fact, we sell them here for as little as like $200. They fit in the palm of your hand. They're f8. They focus down to about 8 feet. It's f8. Period. That's it. That's it. It's an opening, and it's got reflecting mirrors. And optically, they're not the very best, but when they work, they're great. And what I liked about this one, it was f5, so it was a bit brighter than most, and it fit well in my bag. And I got some amazing pictures with this thing. And it was hit and miss, but when it hit, it was great. And this was on a, yeah? Yeah. No, this is manual focus. No, this is.
I used it a long time ago.
Yeah, it's a coffee can with mirrors in it. It's really what it is. And most of them made in Russia under dubious circumstances with mislabels and everything else. But anyway, they're good, and again, they're tiny and inexpensive. This was up somewhere near Thousand Islands, an article I was doing, one of many on old boats, and I just happened to see this as I'm driving on the road. And I pulled out my lens, set up the tripod. I almost always use a tripod, although I've handheld it successfully under miserable circumstances. And I think it just creates an amazing scene. And just as wide-angle lenses exaggerate perspective, telephoto lenses compress and almost eliminate the third dimension. And the longer the focal length, the more two-dimensional your pictures become. The boat in the foreground, which is a nice Chris Craft cabin cruiser, early 50s, late 40s, is about a mile away from that red farmhouse. But it's compressed. And it just creates this wonderful collage, montage kind of a look to it. And couldn't do that with a normal or a 200 or 300, 500 millimeter work perfectly. And they're very good for travel. If you have a 70 to 200 2.8 and you put a two-time converter on it, now you have a 140 to 400 millimeter f4, basically. And you could still focus down to the same minimum focus. It becomes a close focus lens too. But stick to the prime manufacturer. And by the way, I used a two-time teleconverter with this 500 millimeter a few times. Got some great shots of the moon when it wasn't moving. But it gets kind of hairy after that. I recommend the tripod. These guys had no clue I was even taking their picture. They're a few hundred yards away. I waited for them to drift into a shadow of a little stand of trees so that they'd be silhouetted. And this was Field and Stream magazine. And they still recognized themselves and wrote a letter to the editor. That's us. We want a year's subscription and $500. They sent them a free magazine. It was very funny. Same lens. There's a little cat boat up in New England sitting in the middle of a pond. And it was, again, a few hundred yards away. 500 millimeter, brought it closer to me, isolated it from everything in the background, and the water itself became a reflection of the sky. All right, just works. Just works. No, you can't use a polarizer with a mirror lens. There aren't any threads. The front of it's the size of, like, a dinner plate. Three more pictures. The Coca-Cola sign is a 300 millimeter. Again, far away. I couldn't get to it. 300 millimeter pulls it in, and I got tight to it. The lobster boat and the other boat were taken with that same 500 millimeter lens. Now the one on this one right here, this cabin cruise with that house, I love this picture because this was for a cover of Power and Motor Yacht magazine, and we traveled all the way up to Stonington, Connecticut, and we're standing there, and it's socked full of clouds, and this guy is basically going back and forth between the dock and us because we're waiting for the sun to come out, and the sun is dropping, and just before the sun dropped, it opened up, and this golden bolt of light went through, and I'm standing on a floating dock doing this, hand holding that 500 millimeter lens, and I did the best thing you can do. You focus and you hold down the continuous button. And I shot a roll of film, and that's the one sharp picture that came out of all of them. It was great. Luck, pure luck. But here's a great case where they wanted to show an opulence, okay? The house was gorgeous. It was way off in the distance, but that 500 millimeter lens just brought it like right over the bridge. It just created one image. If it was shot with a 200 millimeter, that would be way in the background. You wouldn't even notice it as much. But I was able to compress all of these elements. Luckily, the boat was positioned. We had a short window of space where it got too big, it was too far away. It just sang, and it was pure luck, and we went home and had a great dinner before that. It was lovely. I was talking about focal lengths and distances between you and your subjects, and here's an interesting way of looking at it. Here's a stand of trees taken with a 300 millimeter lens from a few hundred yards away. Here's the same stand of trees with a 50 millimeter lens taken a lot closer to it. And here's the same stand of trees a little closer with a 17 millimeter wide angle lens on a full frame 35. Same stand of trees, different lenses, different distances, very different interpretations. Those are three different pictures.
From the same point of view?
Yeah, I just
closer?
walked up to it, getting closer with a wider lens. All right? This shows you how you should move around. When you see something, don't just take a picture and walk away. Look at it through different focal lengths, different distances, because there are so many different ways of reinterpreting what the subject is depending on your focal length and your distance. So especially with digital, it's so easy to just keep looking and you'll see what you got and how could I change this? Keep exploring. Digital doesn't cost anything. It's free until you choke the card.
So in this case, you changed the lens and moved around, or you just changed?
I just got closer to it. That's all I did. I started off back here, took a picture, walked up closer, changed the lens, took another picture. I basically was trying to frame that front tree in the same basic way as close as I can, and it was just showing the compression. 350 and 17.
What's a focal length? I'm sorry.
Focal length is is how many millimeters your lens is. It's 300 millimeter, 500 millimeter. That's your focal length of your lens. A zoom lens is a variable focal length lens. Where actually it's not true. Variable focal length lens is one that you have to refocus every time you shift the focal lens. A true zoom, you don't have to change focus. So there's actually a technical difference. But anything you're going to buy here is going to be a true zoom, variable focal length. I think they only make for cinema now, if I'm not mistaken. A little sidebar here. If you want to see a great illustration of how changing your focal length and moving at the same time affects the image, go rent the movie Jaws, the original one. How many people have seen Jaws? Okay. There's a great scene in there. Roy Scheider is sitting there on the beach. It's opening day at Amity, and he knows something's out there, and the gendarmes say, no, we're opening up. We're not killing the tourist season. It's bad publicity. And he's sitting on a beach in a chair watching it. They keep having little teases where somebody splashes or something like that. And all of a sudden, he's sitting there, and he sees something. And when I saw this in the movie theater, I actually said, wow. People just turned around. They didn't know, okay. They did something that was awesome, and it illustrated this perfectly in cinematically. And what they did was, he's sitting there, and the camera's fixed on his head. His face is filling the frame, just like that tree is filling the frame. And all of a sudden, he sees something, and he's sitting, and he starts to sit forward in the chair. And as he sits forward, okay, they zoom in, they pull back the camera and zoom in. So what happens is, his head's the same size on the screen, and all of a sudden the background, in the opening of the shot, you can see people walking around and playing in the background behind. All of a sudden, his head's the same. The background folds in around his head, and his face just fills the screen, and you're watching his eyes light up in terror. Watch that, and you'll see what happens between zooming in and pulling back. And it's exactly what I did here, but it's done cinematically, and it drove in the point, he sees something. And it was an amazing piece of cinema, and a great illustration of this whole point. Here's another good example of the same exact subject taken with two different lenses. This is in Paris, houseboats on the Seine River. The 15 millimeter shot is taken right alongside the boats. I then went a few blocks up and then went into the middle of a bridge and shot the same boats with a 500 millimeter lens. Same subject. Look how different it is. What's also interesting, look how far behind in the wide angle shot, look how far behind them that bridge is. But in the 500 millimeter, it's right over them. It frames them. I've eliminated the third dimension. I've just crushed it. It becomes just a two-dimensional illustration. Yeah, the yellow one is actually tucked in over there. You could barely see it. All right? Same three boats, two different positions, two different lenses.
I tried to change lenses. It's a little awkward.
So that's where you buy zooms. But then again, you know what? Sometimes you got to do awkward things to have fun and take good pictures. I can get into a whole other subject than that, but I won't. But sometimes awkward's fun. Or have two cameras. But I'm just, yeah, my point here is that, if you see something that's kind of interesting and kind of fun, explore the heck out of it. And again, here I was shooting film. Digital's free. All right? It doesn't cost you anything. And if you fill up the card, just go back for it. And all of a sudden, you'll see how many pictures were lousy that you took earlier.
But you're not taking it from the same point of view?
No, I'm not even on the same side of the river.
Okay.
I had to walk.
Okay.
Yeah, I had to move.
Okay.
Yeah. I was exploring. I had a week there. I'm sorry? Yeah. Yeah. I use that thing a lot. That lens actually, I first saw used by a photographer named Mark Kane, who was real big back in the 60s. And when I saw his photographs, interestingly, of pictures taken in France in a magazine called Camera, a Swiss publication, I still have the magazine. And when I saw these pictures, I decided I wanted to be a photographer. And when I saw that lens, I snapped it up because that was the lens that made me fall in love with taking pictures. Well, some people don't like it. The funny thing with mirror lenses, the out of focus, the bokeh, most people don't like it because you have mirrors, round mirrors bouncing the image back and forth. You're out of it's called donuts. Actually, round donuts in the background. None of these pictures show it, but a lot of people don't like that. I couldn't care less. I'm fine with it. But a lot of people find it disturbing. I find a lot of people disturbing by that. Macro lenses. A lot of your cameras and lenses say close focusing, but close focusing does not mean macro. Macro is a very specific kind of a lens. Anybody here remember enlargers? Okay. When we used to shoot stuff called film, we had to make prints and use enlargers. And you put the negative with transparency into this enlarger, and it would be projected. Now, if you put a regular lens on an enlarger and you focused on the easel before you put the paper in total darkness, if you use a regular lens, the center would be sharp, but the edges would be fuzzy. And that's because if you notice, the front element of your lens is always curved. Okay? Macro lenses tend to have flatter front elements. And by doing that, what's happening is that the center and the edges are equal focus, which is why if you're photographing artwork, documents, or anything that needs high resolution close up, you want to have a macro lens. Macro lenses also focus closer than close focusing lenses. And they are sharp across the board. Now again, if you're photographing a 3D object, it's going to be out the window. But they're higher resolution. They also tend to be sharper at close-up than infinity, but for most people it won't make a difference. You can use macro lenses as a conventional lens for normal pictures. They come in normal, telephoto, some wide angle, but not really. Some of the sharpest lenses you can buy are macro lenses. The 180 macro by Canon is one of the sharpest lenses they make. The 60 millimeters from Nikon and Canon, if you buy a macro lens, you've got a good sharp lens. And it'll focus down almost always to life size, which means you could replicate 1:1, which is something that's nice about it. And also makes it kind of fun for taking pictures because you can get in real close to things and abstract them. Okay? Some of this stuff, by the way, a lot of these pictures were taken within 5 or 6 blocks of where we're standing right now. That peeling paint is right across the street. They're, again, every storefront on 9th Avenue, has 200 years of paint and posters on it. And you get into real little areas, and it's wonderful what you could see and what you can capture. I just like that, to get in so close, we're beyond to a point where you can't even recognize what it is. It's just a lot of fun to shoot that way. Most of these are taken inches away from the subject, the real close ones. Right across the street, storefronts. And again, some of these I had to get down on my hands and knees to take pictures, but you got to do that sometimes. TiltShift. Anybody familiar with TiltShift lenses? Yeah, well, not only, okay, they're kind of fun. TiltShift lenses are very, very interesting lenses. It used to be if you wanted to get buildings not falling over or photograph products without distortion, you would use a view camera, which means you could take the front of the camera and the back of the camera and make all kinds of angle adjustments to them. TiltShift lenses enable you to do very much the same. And they come in a variety of focal lengths, usually 24 millimeter, 45, and 80 or 90 millimeter, depending whether you're shooting with Nikon or Canon. And those are the only 2 companies that now make them. I think Zeiss makes a couple of tilt shifts for fitting a few cameras. And Canon also makes a 17 millimeter ultra wide tilt shift, which I've used, which is unreal. They're pricey, but what they do is pretty wonderful. And the way they work is that they're manual focus, no autofocus. You focus what you're doing, and you'll see these little knobs and attachments on them. They enable you to take the front of the lens and basically move them around and twist them, which enables you to change the plane of focus and where the subject sits within the frame. Here's a building a few blocks north of here, and I put the camera in the position that it was used off to the side so you can see what it is. If you were to take a picture of a 12-story building, or in this case a 9-story, whatever it is, from street level you have to look up. When you look up, you get what's called Keystone Effect. That's what they call it when it looks like the building's falling in. So to use a tilt to correct that, you either go out and use a view camera, which is cumbersome, and no one's really using them anymore, or you get a tilt shift lens. And what you do is you put the lens at the neutral position, as shown. Now, if you're looking straight ahead from street level, half of your picture is going to be the street. So rather than tilt the camera up, you turn one of the little dials on the side, and the lens slowly shifts up to that position and straightens the building out while looking straight ahead. So instead of you looking up at the camera, the lens looks up. And that's before and after. And it's all done in camera. And it's a very neat trick. Now, you could use this for architecture, product photography, cars, boats, but you got to be careful with that stuff. Another interesting thing about tilt shift lenses is because you could knock the lens off axis, you could play around with what's in focus or what's not in focus. Now, here's another thing where I was driving along and son of a gun, there was this sled I had to hit, red sled, that's it, I'm hitting the brakes, I'm out of the car. Now, This is taken, keep in mind, the maximum aperture of this lens is f2.8. That's the wide aperture. All of these pictures were taken at f2.8. Now watch what you can do with focus. This is with the lens at neutral. I'm focusing on the sled, and you can see it falls off left, right in the background, gets soft. If I tilt the lens one way, I amplify the focus on the right side of the frame, and I defocus on the left. I did not touch any of the control. I did not stop down, open up, or change my focus. If I shift the lens the other way, I get the opposite effect. Interesting selective focus. All right? Here's even a better one. Went back to that little restoration village, a little brick house with the white post. These lenses focus down very close to half life size. They're also technically macro lenses. They're quite sharp. I set up the lens in a tripod, looking straight ahead, and I focused at the top of the white post, this part right here, which was about 10 inches away from the lens. Now you'll note that the house in the background is out of focus. Now if you're normally if you want to get everything focused, what do? You stop the lens down, right? To like f22. In this case, you can go down to f45 with these lenses. They're designed to go down real tight. Yeah, okay? Now, without touching my f-stop or changing my focus, I tilted the lens forward, and at f2.8, I got everything in focus. From 9 inches to about 25 feet away at f2.8. That's pretty cool. You can't do that in Photoshop. Seriously, you can, now by the way, there are little filters that enable you to knock things out of focus selectively, but you can't bring things into focus like that. It ain't happening. So they're pretty cool lenses. Here's a series of, I've been photographing for about 20 years now, old toys on and off, starting with a view camera. A lot of these are shot, they're all shot split diffusion in dark rooms with open shutters, flashlights, carbon fiber optic lights, and all kinds of diffusers. And these are all multiple exposures in a dark room. And these are all shot with a 35 millimeter DSLR, a Canon 1D Mark something, with 45 millimeter, 24 millimeter, and 90 millimeter TiltShift lenses. And all these are real small. The biggest one's only about that big. Yet getting right up on top of them, I was able to maintain focus across the entire range and actually position them where I want in the frame. And you can't do this with a standard lens. So this is using TiltShift lenses to the maximum, closest focusing, extreme corrections, stopping them down all the way. And it's pretty amazing what you can do with these lenses. They're phenomenal tools. They're pricey, but if you use them right, it's amazing what you can do. Now, if you want to shoot architecture and you don't have the bucks for a tilt shift, which they start at $1,200–$1,300, Nikon D5000 has an interesting little feature. You could take a picture, play it back, and then go in your menu and write perspective control, and all of a sudden this little dial comes up, and you, with your scroll bar, you push it up and down, and all of a sudden it electronically corrects the architecture, and then when you hit save, it creates a brand new JPEG and saves the old ones. You get two pictures. And that's a very cool tool. That's very, very neat. And it's not just for buildings, but even simple photographs like this. I was able to eliminate distortions in camera. So that's a very cool thing. It's a Nikon D5000. My guess is you're going to see this in more and more applications. You can do these kind of corrections also in Photoshop. I believe Picasa, the free download from Google, also offers this same function. Fast glass, wide apertures. We were talking about this earlier. Being able to shoot with a lens at wide open. When I say wide open, that's maximum aperture. If it's your kit lens, that means 3.5, which is not real fast. But with a normal lens, you have a 1.4, f2, 1.2, and faster. You could do some amazing things with that, especially outdoors, because now new cameras, the top shutter speeds go up to a 4,000th of an 8,000th, which means you could shoot at f1.4 on a bright sunny day outside. The advantages is you could be very selective in your focus. That's where the term selective focus comes in. You could focus on your subject and have everything else before and after it out of focus. If you look at fashion shots taken on the city streets, they quite often will use a 200 millimeter lens at f2.8 or f2. The model's in focus, everything else is soft. And here's a good example. This is with an 85 millimeter f1.2 Canon lens. and it was broad daylight, and I only focused on the street, the stop. Everything else before and after is out of focus. If it was all everything in focus, it wouldn't be the same picture. It wouldn't have the same dramatics to it. Wide-angle lenses, telephotos. I really like just getting one piece of the image in focus and let everything going out. It's a very, very, very interesting tool. It's also the way we see, most accurate to the way we see. This is with a variety. The top two pictures were taken with a Nikon 50mm f1.2 manual lens, wide aperture. The one in the upper left was at night of a neon diner sign. The other one is of little flowers growing through a construction fence, wide open. Just knocked everything before and after out of focus. The little red berries are with a 28mm f2 Carl Zeiss lens. Just got the closest ones in focus. Everything else just goes off into a blurry mist. And the one of that little green patch coming up, that's with a 400mm. It's actually the 2 to 400mm Nikon zoom, the new one they came out with, at minimum focus, which is about 4.5 feet at f4, I think. And I was able to get this one little piece of grass bursting through rubberized asphalt on a high school running track, which to me is an act of God, if there isn't. How does this seed know it's time to come? How does it get through? This is this thick. I saw them throwing this stuff down. Molten rubberized asphalt this thick, and that weed knows how to get through it in May. How does it know it's May? How does it do it? I mean, that's just an amazing thing. And I just took this picture. I run there at night, and I went back during the day and said, I got to photograph this. And it was a perfect way of doing it. Just have it isolated. Everything else out of focus. Doesn't matter. This is new to the presentation, spotting scopes. You all know what a spotting scope is? It's sort of like a little a telescope in a way. Birders use them. They're high magnification. People who shoot on target ranges do it. They'll take a shot. You can't see what's going on 100 yards away, 50 yards. So you look through your spotting scope. You can see how far off you are. They come in a variety of price ranges. This one was shot with a Swarovski scope. They make kits that go for about $1,500, $1,600. But what's neat about Swarovski is that they came out with this rig where it has this holder for a DSLR, and the only other thing you need is a normal lens, preferably a short pancake lens, one of the flatter lenses they make. And that butts up against the eyepiece of the spotting scope and basically turned this rig, which I could pick up and just walk around with on my shoulder, was a 2,500mm lens. And I got some amazing stuff. It was tricky to use because you had to sort of like look at where you're going and figure out what you were aiming at, because the angle of view was like 1 degree. But the pictures I was able to get were phenomenal. Okay, and I was doing landscapes, did a bunch, I just threw these in, but I was shooting all kinds of stuff. I was doing beach scenes from the jetty at Barnegat Bay, looking across the bay on a windy day, and you have all the salt air blowing around, and people were just being distorted, and it looked like a fun house that was going on. It was pretty awesome. But this is a relatively inexpensive, high magnification rig. You could not buy a lens of that magnification, of that sharpness. It would cost you a lot more than the cost of this rig. And that the price, I think, included the tripod and the holder and everything else. So it's an interesting alternative to traditional shooting. It's kind of unorthodox in a way, but it works. Yes? Oh, they make lenses, pancake lenses. A lot of the 4/3 cameras have with very, very thin profile normal lenses like 40mm 2.8. They don't stick out much. It's a simple Tessar design is what it is. And it's a very basic normal lens. They're not fast. f2.8 is usually the aperture on them. But they're relatively inexpensive, very, very sharp because the designs are simple it's called a Tessar design. It goes back, I don't know how many decades. But it needs an optical system to get up to it. And the flat lenses, the pancake lenses, tend to be the best. Most 4/3 cameras have pancakes available. This is a Pentax K7. Pentax makes a compact normal lens, a 40mm 2.8. Beautiful lens for traveling, and it worked perfectly with this. By the way, you also shot video through this, and it was awesome. Absolutely awesome. I had boats going back and forth through the waterways, and it looked like they were on top of each other. And it was just an amazing, amazing sequence of movement that was going on. It really, really was. And it was a half a mile away. It was pretty sick.
What could you put on a D300X?
You could do that.
Well, what lens?
Nikon does not currently make a pancake lens, but they have in the past made a 45mm f2.8 GN lens, which goes back to the 60s. GN was for guide number, and the whole thing was you synced it to your flash, and as you focused, it opened and closed the aperture, and that was the original auto exposure for flash system. Now, they reissued that lens several times over the years. The last one was a silver one, and they made it about 8 years ago. My guess is you could find them online. They might be available in the used department. And Nikon resurrects them every once in a while. They might be making them. It was a 45mm f2.8 lens, and it was only about 3/4 of an inch thick. I've owned 2 of them in the past, and I managed to lose both of them. But they were terrific and beautifully sharp lenses. They don't focus very close. They only go down to about 2.5 feet. That's the limitation. Turns it into a Leica. So if you have a Nikon, that would be your ticket, and you rig it up to this, and you got yourself a hell of a telephoto. There is a focusing barrel on that thing. If you look just past, that's your focusing barrel right there. Yeah, it's got, just like a regular lens, it's got focusing barrel on it. Yeah, and it's tricky. It takes a while to get used to, but when it works, it's awesome. But if you're photographing wildlife, they don't know you're there. You're out of sight. You really, really are. I did a filming. There was a newly hatched robins, about 25 feet up in a branch near my house, and I was biking, and I heard this chirping. I came back with this thing, and I shot video through it using that particular system, and I was filling the frame with these little birds, their beaks just peeking over, and every time the mom came back with the worms, I was filming her feeding these things, and they were oblivious to me. It was pretty awesome. It really, really was. It was an interesting experience. A spotting scope. Yeah, in fact, at the bottom of the stairs, when you go back downstairs here, okay, they're right off to the right side with the telescopes. They're in the window. They have all that stuff there. And a variety of companies make them. The Swarovski is beautiful. It's extremely good glass. There are different price ranges of them. There are a few $100s and up. And again, the more you spend, the better it's going to be. Nikon makes spotting scopes. Pentax does. What's nice about Swarovski is that it's the only company that I know of that makes this device to hold. It's a cradle that holds your camera and a lens and fits right into it. That's what's beautiful about their system, is that there's no patchwork. It's modular, it fits together, and it just works. They take all the guesswork out. So you can rig it up with other ones, but yeah, there's a variety. Just like lenses, there's a whole variety of ranges. So yeah, but you'll walk when you go down the stairs. Okay, when you leave here, you're gonna walk right by them. They're right off to the bottom of the stairs. Take a right. They'll be right. They'll be looking at you. So very carefully, I might add. Lens babies. Anybody use them? They're fun. This is the older type. They actually have newer ones out. If you don't know what a lens baby is, it has locking mechanisms. Usually you have to just hold them and bend them and pull them around. When it looks sharp, you like it, you take the picture. They're kind of funny. They're whimsical. They're a lot of fun because no two pictures are the same. They allow you to, like a TiltShift lens, just change what's in focus and what's out of focus. And it creates a really, really nice effect that I've seen used to really, really wonderful results. I played around them. I play with them casually. I know a couple of photographers that they are like religious nuts with them. All they do is use these things, and they take amazing pictures with them. There's a lot of exploring you can do. They just came out with a new unit. In fact, it was on our last newsletter. It's just the basic device with like a ball socket, and you could put any Nikon lens into it. So if you're a Nikon shooter, you could use all your Nikon lenses and still focus to infinity and get these funny effects with it. And that's whether you're shooting full frame or compact DSLR, doesn't matter. Bridge cameras, also known as super zooms, are a relatively new series of cameras, or they've been around for a while. They're first getting good the past 2 or 3 years. And they look like DSLRs, but they fit in the palm of your hand. And really what it is a point and shoot on steroids. The sensor inside is the same one you'll find on your little pocket camera, but they build them up. They have an electronic viewfinder that is starting to approach the usability. Some of the older ones were just horrible. They were tiny TV screens that were miserable for resolution. They're getting better. Some of them are actually quite good. So you have an alternative to looking at that screen under bright sunlight at arm's length. You can actually look through an ocular like you do with a real camera. But the real selling point of these, to me, is the fact that they have crazy zoom ranges. Some of them go from 24 millimeter to 760 millimeter equivalents. And you could fit it into your coat pocket and walk around with it all day long. They just design lenses with very long ranges, and they're filling up a very small sensor. Now remember, they're point-and-shoot cameras. But I find that they're amazing cameras for traveling. It's a fixed lens, but it's every focal length you need in a small package that weighs a few ounces. And you can go around and take, this is all within a few blocks of here, wide angle, normal, telephoto. And again, it's so easy. It fits in your hand. No one's going to hit you over the head to steal it unless they're really desperate. But it's a great travel camera. It's a great camera if you want to be covered for anything, anytime. It's a great second lens camera combination. I'm sorry? Nikon, Canon, Sony, everybody makes them. If you walk out over here to the kiosks, Panasonic, Olympus, they all make them. Pretty much everybody makes them right now. And they're doing some pretty neat technologies with these cameras as well. And by the way, the most expensive ones, like $400 or $500, they're not expensive. They're really, really good. And to me, again, the beauty of having the right camera and lens when you need it, these address that problem. These are all taken within 2 blocks of here. Some of them are out the window from my office. And again, I like the fact that, especially the long super telephoto range on that, you could zoom into distant little things that you see way off there that you normally couldn't do. Because again, they go up to 500, 600, 700 plus millimeter equivalents. That's insane. Holding it steady is the challenge at that point. The photograph with that moon, I'm sorry? Bridge cameras or super zooms. There's all different names. I call them tweeners.
They'll say, oh my God, that's not a camera. You know,
That's what you say to them. Okay? That's not a camera. You give me a shoebox with a piece of enlarging paper in the back and a pinhole, and I'll go take a good picture with it. I don't subscribe to that. I'm sorry. I don't subscribe to that.
But you understand the snobbishness.
Oh, I sure do. You walk around Central Parks Lake on a Sunday afternoon, you'll see all these peacocks strutting around with all the stuff. Okay? Ask to see their pictures. Horrible. I don't judge that. I really, really don't. I don't think that your camera... Now, to a certain point, there's a certain quality issue now. There are certain things I can't do at a super zoom. I won't attempt to shoot something that's going to be a billboard with it, although you can. But to me, it's the picture, it's the image that you're trying to do. And the quality of cameras has gotten to a point right now that, I mean, I could take a point and shoot and make it a really beautiful 13 by 19, 16 by 20 print, especially if you could shoot RAW with them, and many of these cameras do allow you to shoot RAW. And if you're exposing properly, you could do an awful lot. So while I do definitely appreciate, the technology that goes into some of the full-frame cameras, even some of the APS-C cameras, a Rebel is an amazing piece of equipment, in my opinion. All right, so is the most basic Nikon and Pentax. They're all amazing what they do these days. And these little cameras are equally impressive in their own right. And yes, they're going to get noisy when the sun goes down, okay? Unless, of course, they have the handheld twilight mode that goes into some of the new cameras like Sony and Fuji and Nikon, where it takes 6 rapid pictures, samples them, and puts all of the elements together. Great stuff. You familiar with this? Okay, handheld twilight goes under, that's Sony, that's what Sony calls it. Nikon now basically uses it. It's Sony technology, so does Fuji in some of their cameras. It's a form of that. What it does, when you put it into this mode, it bumps your ISO up to 400 or 500, which by itself is poisonous with a point and shoot because it's too noisy. But what it does, in fact, I was at a wedding the other night and I was taking pictures without flash, and people saying, "What are you doing?" And they were amazing. You take the picture, it takes 6 very rapid pictures, okay? And if something moves, it ignores it. And then what it does, while it's processing, it samples each of the pictures, pulls the sharpest, best detailed portions of each, and puts it together in one single optimized image. And while it's there, it dampens the noise. And you could walk around at night, and I've done it. In fact, if you follow the newsletter, you've seen the stuff. I mean, I was walking around here, it was last Christmas, up and down 34th Street at night, taking pictures that were frightfully good. And there's a lot of little features in the point and shoots that I was never a big Sony fan, and the past 2 years, I think they're just doing some amazing, amazing things. They really, really are.
You call a bridge camera a point and shoot?
It is a point and shoot. It's a fancy, because the sensor is the same sensor you'll find in the camera that fits in your pocket. It's not a big sensor.
So then why don't they call it a bridge camera?
Because it looks like a DSLR. In other words, if you want to go, if you want the flexibility of a DSLR, a wide range of focal lengths, and you want a grip, and you want to be able to look through an ocular, it mimics all these things, but it's still a point and shoot. But it does a great job. It lets you take wonderful pictures, no matter what's going on. Another little technology that they do with these cameras is called sweep panorama. Now, this has also been incorporated by many Nikon and Fuji cameras. And these pictures were taken with that. Now, what it is, you put it into this mode, and a little arrow appears on the screen, and you push the shutter button and follow the arrow, and it takes up to 100 photographs in quick succession, stitches them together into one picture. Some of these are up to 265 degrees across. More examples of it. That top shot was taken last year. We did the, what's it called? The Manhattan Henge. Yeah, we had a blast with that. Anybody here last year for that? Anybody show up for that? Manhattan Henge. Twice a year, the sun rises or sets and goes right down the main avenues, okay? And it's kind of like out of the Twilight Zone, because all of a sudden photographers start appearing on all the corners. And people just, now mind you, look what's going on here in the top. I don't know if you can make it out, but there's people standing, that's 5th Avenue and 34th Street. All right? And people are driving around, and cars and buses are honking. Photographers are just filling the streets. They don't know what the hell's going on here. It's like they come out of the woodwork. People, old ladies are setting up tripods in the middle of 5th Avenue, shooing away taxis. It was just to be there and watch it was just amazing, okay? And it happens twice a year. And this was a great application for the camera. I was able to get the crowds and the sun going down 34th Street. The center picture is actually 2 of these pictures stitched together for 360 degrees of lower Manhattan. And the cruise ship was taken from the deck of the Intrepid, and that's one of those bizarre cruise liners that pulled in. And it was kind of fun. And it was also kind of weird I took another shot that same day where I had my back to the city. I'm looking at New Jersey, but the tips of Manhattan on both ends of the picture. I'm looking out that way. So it's pretty wild. Now, another thing that's kind of fun about this is that if you read the instruction book, they say that to properly use this sweep panorama, it's very important to keep the camera level and don't go off center. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read like that, the first thing I want to do is, well, what happens if you don't, okay? And you get some great pictures, okay? So ignore the rules, okay? Now, mind you, this is taken with a $300 camera. Now, they incorporated the same technology into Sony's DSLRs, but the older, slower technology. So you can actually buy a DSLR that'll do this also, except that the resolution is even better. And so is the handheld twilight mode. They're building that into a lot of the DSLRs right now. I don't use a flash anymore. I've just gotten rid of all that stuff. And even with panoramics and stuff, this is great stuff. So we're talking about lenses, but keep in mind the camera technologies are tying into this as well. Last topic here, point and shoots. We're talking about that again. A couple of years ago, they started making waterproof, drop-proof, shock-proof, freeze-proof cameras, okay? And they're a blast. Number one, you can drop them, okay? I also freaked somebody out once. They wanted me to take a picture, so I poured a glass of seltzer, stuck the camera into the glass, and took a picture through it. They had no idea. They thought it was nuts. Picture came out kind of funny, but you can do it. What's nice about these cameras, aside from the fact that they really can't take a beating and they're tough, because most point and shoots are really delicate. When these things came out, I said, they're waterproof. The picture you see here was taken in a puddle after a rainstorm. I was biking through Johnson Park near my house, and there was a big downpour that day. And there were deep puddles, and it was early spring, and all these new saplings came falling off, and I see them floating in the puddles. And I took the little point and shoot. It was an Olympus, and I set it to macro mode, and I put it on auto flash, and I submerged the lens halfway into the puddle. And that's what you get. Remember I say about don't take pictures from my level? Sometimes you gotta, okay? This is pictures in a puddle. And the pictures are awesome. There's no Photoshop here. I adjusted levels to intensify the colors, which is normal. But this is with a pocket point and shoot, a few $100s. It's awesome what you can do. You ever wonder what a waterfall looks like if you're at the bottom looking through it? This is the edge of a waterfall. I just stuck my hand and shot through it. So this is the waterfall, and that's looking up at the trees, and there's something dripping in the water above there. And no one got hurt. Okay? Here's another thing, water cascading down rocks after a rain. I don't care what the brand of the camera is. I don't care the format. I don't care how much it costs. It doesn't matter. It's about taking pictures and exploring.